Hey guys, and welcome to how to paint a custom scheme on an Adeptus Custodes Warden. So today we're going to be going through and painting this up in a blue steel color scheme using color glazing and so on, much like many of the other tutorials on my channel. And if I'm really good, I'll put a link to the how to color glaze blue steel armor, the hobby tips video that I did just recently for you there and in the description below. But we're going to be going through the whole process of my custom scheme. So more than just the armor, doing the weapon and so on, the shoulder pads, all the other little the robes, all the other little pieces that are on this model. We're going to be doing the full color scheme here, so it should be a lot of fun. We're going to be using, if you haven't seen that other hobby tips video, we're going to be using these Vallejo colors here, the Arctic blue and the Acero steel, and we're going to be blending those together to make a mid-tone blue steel color that we're going to use to then color glaze into that using purples, magenta, blue and so on, with some silver highlights to give us that nice sort of interesting blue steel armor with some secondary elements using neutral blacks, as I like to do. We'll be using some contrast paint for some subtle tinting of the black highlights and so on certain areas. We'll be doing some magenta pop color there for the weapon and the eyes and so on. So it should be a lot of fun. So grab a model and let's get started. Alright, so to begin with we want to make that blue base. So we're using those Vallejo air colors mixing together in roughly a 1-to-1 mix as you're watching me do now, and just veering it more towards the steel side, so a little bit lighter. And the reason for that is as we add all these washes on and these glazes, it's going to dull it down a little bit. So we want to start from a slightly lighter base. So once you've got that, you can paint that straight onto the armor and base coat it. You won't need to dilute it. It's relatively thin already, which is great. So you're just going around and just painting that on and getting a nice base to begin with, and then we're going to move into our first wash color, which is the Nightshade blue, and we're mixing a little bit of that Lamia medium in there to dilute it down slightly so it's not too dark, and we're just going to directionally paint that on into all the cracks and grooves and just build that nice shadow and deeper blue color into the armor. And so once you've done that, you should end up with a good starting point, but it's going to be a little dark, so we want to come back in and build up some of that light. So now we come in with the dry brush with the silver and do a directional dry brush across the edges very lightly and directionally, just to now pick out some soft line edge highlights across that armor and buff it up a bit so it's a little bit brighter, because as we put those glaze colors in, it's going to darken it down again. And so we're trying to, you know, minimize the amount that it's going to darken it. We still want a range of tonal values. So we're going to then begin with our purple shade. So mixing the Lamia medium, 2 or 3 drops, nice and thin, and you're going to very carefully just paint that in, as you're going to watch me do, into all those little cracks and grooves and areas to get little fades of purple around the model. Again, you don't have to do this everywhere, but it's about just building in a variety of color. So you've got some blue and now you've got some purple. The purple will also deepen those shadows and give you a better contrast between the bright silver on the edges and the shadow areas of the model. And so once you've done that, now we come in with our magenta color, and again, same thing, very directional. You don't have to do everywhere, it's just certain areas to deepen the color, make it more vibrant, more interesting. And once that's dry, then we'll come in with our line edge highlight with a fine detail brush and some silver, and you're going to pick out just the main top areas of the model, so things like the shoulder pad, the knee pads and so on, the chest, and you're just going to run your little fine detail brush across that and do some nice crisp hard edge lines. And you don't have to do everywhere. That's the point of this technique, is to speed up your process, so that original dry brush is going to give you a lot of those smaller edge highlights, and then that fine detail brush is going to give you some hard edge across the major forms, and so you'll end up with a nice contrast of hard edge and soft edge highlights, which is going to complexify the model and make it way more satisfying to look at. And so we should end up with like quite a dynamic surface. And then once we've done that, we'll be moving on to all of the metal areas, the the pipes, the gun, and so on. Some of the smaller details on the sword and on the gun, which I've done in a brass. You could do in a gold or whichever color you like, but basically the secondary metal areas. And so we're going to start by base coating those out. So using the lead belcher and the Runelord brass to pick those out. You'll see me doing that, and once you've done that, it's a very simple process like we've done with the armor, just building up a few washes and then highlighting back into it. So using the sepia shade and then on oil after that, mixed with the Lamia medium, again 1 drop, maybe 2, just to dilute it down a little bit, and then you're going to build up that tone and darken those shadows. And then once you've done that, you'll come in with your fine detail brush with your silver again and just touch up some of those areas to get a bit more brightness in there. So it's not everywhere, just on the raised areas. You'll see me doing that just on the tip of the gun, you know, the spike and so on, across the top of the eagle emblem that's on there, all those kind of areas that just where the light would hit it. You know, the light's coming from above, we're just hitting those top areas across the pipes, on the chest, maybe the ones on the face helmet there, the little pipes on the side. You know, just picking out some of those areas and sharpening them up a little bit so that they read a bit more clearly from further away. And that's really the point here. And then once you've got all that down and that's kind of looking good, you'll notice probably that the brass or the gold that you've used is probably going to look a little bit dark and sort of muddied out because of that sepia and Nullinol shade that you've put on. So to bring back a little bit of color into there and to make it a little bit more interesting, you should have some of that purple and magenta shade color sitting on your palette. And so what I like to do then, just like for my Stormcast videos and so on, we'll be doing color glazing into brass armor. Same thing here, we're going to use a bit of that purple and that red to help enrich some of those brassy areas on the sword, the emblems on the gun and so on, just to enrich that color and give it a bit more vibrancy. So you start with that purple and just start putting it in. You'll notice straight away the color's going to jump out at you and be a lot more interesting to look at, and just dabbing a little bit more of that in on the end of that sort of fan area on where the blade is on below the gun, that sort of thing. Just adding those purple and magenta tones in there, and you'll instantly see a difference between that silver highlight and the shadow. Now, before we get onto the main part, which is going to be the robes and all the highlighting of the black on the weapons and so on, we've got to get that base out of the way. And the reason for that, if you've done it in the same way that I've done, where you've finished the base, any over dry brushing and so on is going to clip on the robes that are around the bottom of the feet. So I like to do that base first and get that out of the way, so then it's not interacting with any of the painting that we're doing on the robes. So this is really an optional thing. You'll do your own basing in your own way, but I've basically, which is something I've done on most of my models on this channel, we're going from a Necromancer cloak, which is a dark grey, neutral grey, and then just painting that out and then building up the colors through dry brushing through lighter and lighter greys into like an off-white, and that's really all I'm doing there. And then coming back in with some green and sepia shade mixed with a bit of Lamia medium, and just basically staining it to give a sort of, you know, rubbled, muddy, sort of ashen surface that these Custodes are on. You could go for a nice contrast there and do like a sandy, yellow sandy base. That would be nice to contrast against the blue and the purple that are in the armor. But for me, I just wanted to keep that dark feel and that sort of you know, grimdark kind of aesthetic. So I went for the ashen base because it doesn't compete with any of the colors that are going on in the model. Okay, so now we're onto I guess the slower section of this paint job. So we're looking at all of those black robes, the gun casing and so on, and on the sword as well, all those black areas. So it's just a very simple case of setting up your gradient, as you'll see me do, mixing through about 4 or 5 different levels of grey, going from a dark grey all the way up to a light, and then you're basically just painting, following the folds in the robes, paying attention to how the light is hitting, so from above. So it's very good that those Custodes models are sculpted so crisply. The robes have a lot of really defined lines, which is nice and easy to know where to paint, just almost like armor. And so you just paint along that, and each layer, each successive step going lighter, you're going to paint less and less of the robes up into the points where you'll see like either bends or kinks in the robes. That's where the light will be greatest, and you'll see me doing that, just dotting in those final highlights highlights into those spots to really punch up that black, but not really painting a lot of the robe itself. It's staying basically a black. And what I've done is I've painted a few layers of black here, of the Abaddon black, to help give a nice deep base for these highlights to go on, so it really reads as a black robe rather than a sort of off grey robe. Another point there is that we're using neutral greys and not blue greys. The reason for that is that this is a supporting element to the armor, which is the main focus of this paint job. So if we were to use a colored highlight for these black areas, it would compete then with the armor. So we're not doing that. We're going to just use these neutrals to put it into the background. And so the same thing goes for the gun casing. You're just building on those edges, putting those fine points of the lighter highlights, and you want to go a little bit brighter on the gun casing and so on, because we're going to be very soon coming in with a purple contrast glaze to just give it a little bit of an off color there. Same for on the shoulder pads as well, the highlights around that just a little bit brighter, so that you can set up for that glaze just like we did on the armor. So you're going to see that happening, and then what we're going to end up with is a very off lavender sort of pink purple tone to that grey highlight on the weapon casings, the sword casing and the shoulder pads, but not on the robes. The robes stay a neutral grey. We don't need to do that on them. And then we'll come in with a final optional satin varnish, but we'll go through that process in just a second. So yeah, now we're moving on to that purple. So we've got some little areas on that shaft there where you've got sort of like a handle area, and on the sword as well. So I'm just using some purple here, mixing up through 3 tones, you know, just putting a bit of highlights on it. This is another optional thing, but I'm using a color that is complementary to the other colors that are in our scheme, which is important. So we're going to be whatever you want to do there. You could leave it black, you could do it gray, whatever you want, but you don't want it to sort of overly compete with the rest of the model. This is a limited palette idea. So as I said just moments before, we're going to use that Magus purple contrast mixed with the contrast medium into a glaze format, so it's quite thin, and we're going to paint it over the gun casings, any of the black areas, and the purple handles, over any of the black and purple areas on the sword and so on, and on those shoulder pads, and give us a very, very soft, subtle purple tint to those areas. And then to further increase the contrast here, as an optional step, we're going to use some Vallejo satin varnish and paint that onto the shoulder pads and the gun casings and so on that we've just tinted, to further give a little bit of luster and low sheen to them, so that they've got a different material surface to the armor, to the robe. So the robe is matte, the armor is metallic, and those shoulder pads and the gun casings are a sort of a soft sheen to them, and this will read as a very deep black. The more shine you get on a black, the blacker it feels. And so now we have that sort of top plume on the helmet. Now this is again an optional step. I've chosen for a bone one. Often when I do sort of like unit champions, sergeants, or I want to have a focal model in a unit, I'll use a bone color, bone white, to sort of somewhere on their helmet or somewhere like that, to sort of separate them out. I know Custodes don't normally have that, I don't think, like sergeants and things like that in the squads, but I just wanted to do that just to give a difference in the squad. So I'm doing this as bone, but you could do black with some grey highlights. You could do any color you like, really. This is just my particular choice, so I'm just building up through a sharp tip bone, dry brushing up through white to get a sort of bony, bright finish, just to separate him out in the squad, just because he's a little bit different to the others. He's holding on to his little blade there, and in a little bit more of a different pose to the other wardens in the unit. So I felt like that was a cool idea, but it's totally optional. You don't have to go along with that. And then finally we're moving on to the red power axe, so and the eyes and so on, so anywhere that you want red. So with that axe, we're again setting up a gradient through Mephiston red and a little bit of black, so for a slightly darker tone, moving up through Mephiston and then adding little bits of white to that up until maybe about a 4th step where you've got quite a pinkish white tone. And again, we're just starting with a base, and then, as you'll see me do, and then painting the Mephistos on, but leaving the depression in the axe where it starts to change surface, so the plane, so moving into the edge. You'll see me flicking my brush in a sort of feathered way to sort of simulate that shadow that you get as the plane changes on the axe, and then you're just moving to the edge and going lighter and lighter, and then finally on those last 2 highlights, just doing a line edge highlight across the edge of that blade and using a little bit of the off pinky white color in certain spots, like on the very tip of the edge, and the sort of the highlight corners where you see a change in direction, just putting a little few spot highlights of white in there just to simulate the power running through the axe and sort of hot spots of light hitting it. But it's very subtle. It's not a heavy power weapon style. It's quite a subdued look, but we are getting a pop color of red into this color scheme, so it will draw the eye, but not overly so. I still want the main element to be the armor and around the face and so on, so we're not overly doing that power weapon, because otherwise it's going to draw your eye too much away from the focus of the model. And there we go, one custom scheme on an Adeptus Custodes Warden, all done. So let's take a look. So yeah, you can see how easy this is. Nice limited palette, really fast, using the techniques that I've shown here on the channel, just like with the Stormcast videos, except now we're doing blue steel. Yeah, this is really fun. I can't wait to do more of these for the channel. It's going to be a lot of fun just building that up. It'll be cool to see how this looks on one of the bikes. I think that'll be really fun as well. But yeah, that's basically it. You know, as I said, I'll be doing more of these. We might even do some maybe some hobby tips videos on some different types of power weapon kind of effects like lightning and so on, but we'll see how we go with that. But I'll leave you with a close-up image of this guy and the squad together to see how they look, so you can sort of get a better visual for it, because this camera tends to blow out some of the colors there. But yeah, I'm really happy I got this done, so I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, subscribe button, it really helps me out, and I guess I'll catch you on the next one.